Hi, everybody, and welcome back to episode 7 of Women in Philanthropy podcast. I just wanted to say a really big thanks for everybody who's been listening and providing comments and feedback. It's such a great feeling to have people who find this podcast valuable and that it's reflecting your experiences and giving you people to connect to. So thank you so much for being with us. Today we have 2 great guests. We have Zofia Sochanik and Juliet Valdinger. And today we're going to talk all about connection and these ladies' roles within the philanthropic space around network building and around the importance of connection. So I won't preface anymore, but who would like to start? Who would like to tell me about your role as a connector?
I can jump in if you like. So this is Zofia here. So the organisation I'm currently with is working at a very unique intersection in this sector. So it covers philanthropists, impact investors, like any form of professional advisors. So that's your wealth managers, your tax advisors, accountants, investment managers, lawyers, private client lawyers. But also philanthropists, the philanthropy advisors, and also the charities themselves, the beneficiaries and the grant makers. So it's a very unique intersection.
Well, in previous podcasts, people have talked about, when I asked the final question is like, what's the next needed role? Several people have said translators and like complex systems like communicators and being able to bring people together. So that's why I think your roles are so very interesting. Juliet, what's your take on connections in philanthropy, in the philanthropic sector? Why do we do this?
Well, it doesn't work if we don't all connect to each other. It's a huge playing field. You know, definitely.
It can work. You just give your money away. You just give your money away. You don't have to talk to anybody.
Know what you're doing, and you don't find out if it's worked. It's just, I see that there are 2 sides of a philanthropy coin, and both sides want to do the same thing. But if they're not talking to each other, which often they aren't, everyone's trying to do it. They're trying to do it differently, and it becomes fragmented and fractured. So we do all need to talk. You get funders who think they know what needs to be done, and they've done no research and haven't asked anybody on the ground what needs to get done. You get fundraisers who need the money, so say what they think the funders want to hear, and it is, and then they kind of do what they want to do, but it's not what the funders want, and then it causes problems. So we have to work together to do what we all want to do, but it doesn't work at the moment. It's just too fragmented, and we need to connect everybody to get everybody to talk the same language.
There's different areas as well where there needs to be that kind of connection. So the one that you've just spoken about are funders and their beneficiaries. But there's also the people doing the work on the ground. There's the beneficiaries themselves. There's just so many different languages being spoken without it being actual languages, but you know what I mean. And there is a need for not just funders to understand what it is that the beneficiaries need, but also from a fundraiser's perspective, from a charity perspective, actually understanding what the constraints are on a philanthropist or on a grant-making foundation and why they exist, and starting to understand that there is need to be clearer on what your needs are as an organisation, and be okay to say, well, I'm afraid we don't fit. It's very much around values.
I want to bring in a metaphor here. And this is all about, you are actually existing in that role as connector. So we're talking about all the reasons we need to connect, but like you are actually embodying this connection capability and possibility. And my metaphor is the mycorrhizal network underneath trees that communicate to one another and all these different languages that the network speaks. And I think it's sort of a beautiful symmetry between the network of philanthropy. But I'm curious about actually sitting in that role. What does it take to embody that type of connection that in that space?
I find I don't find it hard to do just talking to random people on bus stops and sending Christmas cards. But apparently it's strange.
Well, I've met in my career, Julia, I've met quite a few of you types. Yeah. So there's my former CEO at certain small NGOs, and it's those people that go around just talking to randoms randomly. They're the ones that do that. I mean, that is a natural, charismatic thing that you have that makes what you do so easy, because you walk into a room and you just talk to people, and it puts people at ease. And so, you know, that's why at our events, I will go to Juliet and I will go, can you help me? I need you to talk to this person because they're new and they don't really know what networking is yet. And can you just give them some pointers? And so that's for me, with the events that we run as an organization, having certain people in the room who allow that space for the diversity in the room to connect is really important. And Juliet for me is brilliant at that. I come from a very different angle from my career, having grown up in a council estate in Cornwall. No wealth, no understanding of travel, none of these wonderful things that are out there. And then I became accidentally a fundraiser after working in nightclubs. And working in nightclubs in Liverpool.
I want to know more about that.
That's for another podcast. But I found that I was dumped in a room with very rich men and having to develop a development board at the age of 24. And I didn't know the language. I didn't know what I was doing. There was an appropriateness that I thought was something I just had to put up with. It's a very different thing. What I learned very quickly in that is how to empathize with the person I'm speaking to. If I've got to connect with somebody who I don't know anything about, how do I make sure that there is some level ground here so I can start a conversation? And because I was put in that position, I felt I'm never going to let anyone else be put in that position. There's a room for everyone to be heard, no matter what their view, no matter what their feelings. That actually that's the only way we're going to find solutions to some of the harshest issues out there.
The question I love to ask now is like, how does this role enable giving?
It's a privilege and it's a pleasure to be in a position to try and make things work. Mm-hmm. You know, when you see people who really want to make change and other people want to make change, it's like, right, how can I bring you together? Because you want to do A, you want to do B. How can we make C? You know, or 2 + 2 = 4. How do we just make it work? And it's exciting, but you've got to have a lot of energy, which sometimes everybody flakes, but you've got to personally want to make it happen. And I think that's just, for me, what keeps me going 99% of the time.
You can be philanthropic in many different ways. And for me, philanthropy means being able to actually catalyze change. So it's catalytic. It's not just providing a service that is needed. It's making a big difference to some of the biggest challenges the world faces. And unless you've got every player in the room, you're not going to find those solutions. Not global.
No, unless you have that connector too, who can know where those people are, even if they're not in the room. It is sometimes a very unseen role, I think.
I've got so many people that Juliet has introduced me to that have gone on to be brilliant places for me to find new and interesting innovations for our events. And I'm glad I've got a forum now to thank you, Juliet, for that, because you do deserve that kind of accolade.
Absolutely, yeah. I second it.
But it's being able to actually bring in the people in the room that are talking somewhere else about something very different and actually making it all come together.
And, I think that's why we're connecting everybody. It's like an enormous, 5,000 people jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah, and that goes back to what
together and make a pretty picture.
What you were saying about the connectors underneath the mushrooms. I think
with the trees.
Yeah, the mushrooms and the trees. I think the point around it comes back to community. There's a need for a community-centered ideal, and if you're talking about power imbalance, if you're talking about dignity, if you're talking about equality, equity, gender, all of it, it comes back to just being a community that has compassion and empathy. And it's very hard for people to do on a daily basis because life has a lot of stresses. So you need people who are going to bring the moment where it's like you and you coming together and talk, focus on this. This is what needs to be done.
Well, you started to raise some really big issues there. And so it leads me to my next question. I want to know from each of your point of views, what are the issues in philanthropy that need airing? I mean, there's probably a lot, so pick one.
There's a report that we shared that had been looking at EDI at the grant maker and charity, big charity level, and that it is not up to scratch. It's not up to par. And if you are in your own home, not practicing what you preach, how are you supposed to be transformative? How are you supposed to be able to make other organisations sit up and listen if you yourself are not yet getting it right? So where's the reflection on your own own work before you do it. That would be, for me, as a key thing. And reflection, I suppose, I think there is still too many egos and not enough reflection.
Why do you think there isn't enough reflection? I've heard this too, things like we're too busy or we are reflecting, but I feel like it's not prioritized.
I will answer that with money. I think money makes it hard. The lack of thereof money makes it hard, and the fast-paced expectations of delivery. There's no finger blaming. Every organisation is trying to do its best, and nobody's in this sector because they want to coast. But it's true. It's difficult, and sometimes I don't believe that there is the space, that people are given the space to do it.
My thing that needs airing, I mean, that's, my particular interest is the assumption that when you're rich, you know how to give and what to give to. And it's such a wrong opinion. It's just, you don't know what you don't know. And some wealthy people, they've either worked really hard or they've inherited wealth. Not everybody has experienced a lot of the challenges they see. So I make up stories now, but say I inherited wealth, but, racism is my thing for whatever reason. I don't know how to apply my £5 million, but that's my thing. But where on earth am I going to start? And I think people who, with money or don't money, just assume, it's easy to do. And it's not. I think it's such a big, exciting opportunity, particularly with the next generation coming on board. And they have this huge moral compass. They want to apply it. It's just, you need to talk to them and educate them. Don't assume they know how to bring it together.
I think that's one of the reasons why I'm so banging on about talking about these roles, is because we talk about donors, grantees, and organizations. And then, to the point of connection, we miss out on all the people in between that make this actually work. And so you guys are great today because you're starting to give more spotlight to actually the connections and how it works. But even everybody's role on the podcast so far, it's to say there's a lot of roles in here that grease the wheels and teach people how to do it and enable the giving and get the money out the door. And so I think speaking more about roles, well, that's my soapbox here. So.
You don't have a textbook, you don't have a playbook, you don't have guidelines on how you should or shouldn't behave with human beings. You have to just sit and listen, you have to observe, and you have to find a way to connect with that person. And I think that's the same when you're dealing with people that aren't sitting in your world of philanthropy or aren't there yet. You've got to get them there. How do you get them there at their time, at their pace, but also with the urgency that it's needed? It's quite a conundrum.
That's right. It's not easy work. That's why we're celebrating it. Okay, I'm mindful of time. I try to keep these short because we're busy people. Juliet, do you have anything to add before I move on to rapid fire?
As I said, we're a big jigsaw puzzle. Yeah. And I think, as we talk about financing it, we need people who are interested enough to say, okay, well, this is what money I've got. I can see this needs doing. How about this as a job? We need the people who can finance it to come forward and proposition it and see what's needed and fund it. Because if it's people on the ground...
I think that's attributing value to this type of connecting role. It's not very easy. There's no guidebook that says this is how much... do you even call it consultancy? But how would, it doesn't exist in sort of a normal job description. That's why we're talking about a role rather than a job title. And so I think to your point, how do you actually attribute value to it? It is valuable. It's so valuable, but how do you talk about
demonstrating of the impact of it is quite hard. And that is something that we discuss quite often, obviously. And it's something where funders are asking for impact reports on where their money's gone. It's very hard when you're a connector to do that. I mean, there are some people there are some social enterprises right now that are looking directly at how to do that through computer digitizing it. But it's very hard to do. And a lot of it is outcomes based rather than impact based. I got this many people to an event. This many people spoke. These many people read our magazine. And it's very much... Well, what does that mean in the sector then? What's the impact of that in the sector? And that is much more anecdotal. We can see that there's been a shift in the last 5 years. But does that mean that it was because of us? We don't know. It's very hard for those things to be easy to demonstrate an impact, and that can make it hard to fund as well. I totally hear what Juliet's saying about how do you monetize that. That is, I don't think you're alone. I think any philanthropy advisor out there will say the same thing.
I just want to hammer home how much sort of emotional labor this also takes. I mean, I know it's natural for some people and for the rest of us, it's tough work, right? And you got to have a lot of self-care around it. And it is connecting between people who don't speak the same languages and have different, and not real languages, but the way that they think in the world and ideologies. And it's having the emotional intelligence to be able to bridge those. So I just want to honor that in what you guys have both said. Okay, but I am going to rapid fire now.
I'm nervous about this. This makes my brain go,
this one. Okay.
Fight or flight response.
So this is it. So what is the worst philanthropic jargon?
I'm happy to go with that one.
So many.
It's not even necessarily a jargon, but what gets my goat at the moment is people who occasionally, I hear people say, oh, ESG is so last season. And I understand with the money, with the cost of living crisis, investors aren't thinking about ESG some more. And people I know, they talked about it all last year, but nobody's talking about it now. But they will. It's just gone quiet, but it's going to come back. And so I would suggest if you're going to invest in an ESG, it's a good time to do it because it's only going to grow. Next generation is not going to forget about ESG. They're not going to forget about climate change. They have no planet to live on. It's not going. So I wouldn't say that's jargon, but it's my bugbear.
That's a good one.
I mean, this is difficult for me because we will be full of jargon in our roles and everything. But I think one of the things, if it's not necessarily jargon, but it's the generational virtual signaling that's happening, and it virtue, not virtual, virtue, and this idea that if you are millennial, then you're good. If you're Gen Z, then you're good. If you're a boomer, then you're bad. And actually, the reality is it's values-based. And yes, the trends are coming from research. And so far, that means that there is obviously a trend that millennials are driving this, that women of wealth are driving this, that we talk about naturally. But it is just that. It is just trends. So boomers, actually, wealth holder boomers, will just need the conversation because it's something they don't understand. The world is different to them. They didn't grow up with internet. They didn't grow up with access to the information that we have now, the rapid fire. So actually stop segmenting boomers off in this idea that they don't care and they don't give a crap. They don't care at all. Segmenting off the Gen X's as these kind of people. It's actually, we've got an idea, it's a trend, it's a theory. Go test it out, go discover, go talk to people, go find out what they're actually about. Don't just pigeonhole them.
You're right, it's not necessarily jargon, but it's one of those things that we take for granted, and it is kind of irritating. And it doesn't address the complexity as it is. Sort of bandages over it. Okay, so on the other side of the coin, what's the most inspiring trend or practice or person that you're seeing right now?
I think I'm excited about, there's a recent letter he came out with, published about philanthropy and pluralism. And they're just, in it, they recognize we have disagreements, but we're doing this together. We have to talk, we have to work as one. And I think it does come onto a jigsaw puzzle. It's like, we all have different views. We need to respect each other, and we have different views, but we need to work together to make it work.
What I'm loving seeing at the moment, and obviously these things all have naysayers and yay-sayers, but for me it's that there is a movement from when I started back in 2006 or 7 working as a fundraiser. Now it's very much, funders are much more open to unrestricted funding and working in collaboration.
That's come up a lot.
Working in collaboration with the part and seeing their beneficiary charities or their social enterprises, seeing them as partners, delivery partners, rather than I'm going to give them money and I'm going to tell them what to do, which is I have seen many times over the years. It's very, sorry to use the word, which is probably the jargon I should have said, patriarchal way of giving. Is changing, and it's good to see that. And actually what we're seeing from that is a lot of debate about what's right, a lot of failure that is allowed. It's not don't hide your failure, it's like we tried this, it didn't work, why didn't it work, let's have a look. And going back to those same funders with that kind of business case rather than a case for sport. It's like, this is what didn't work, this is why it didn't work, and this is what we should be doing, and together, and actually you can help us. And it's that kind of, I think it's born out of a venture philanthropy kind of model, but it's brilliant to see, and it's allowing debate, which I think is the only way that we're going to be able to actually overcome some of these really hard issues.
All right, well, I have one more question. This is a good one. What's the next needed role in philanthropy?
I've got two for that. I know.
You give one to Zofia if she doesn't have one.
I think one I touched on earlier about educating philanthropists who just don't know what they're doing. You know, when I did my dissertation in 2013, there are only 6 organisations, you know, including big banks, who did it. And although it's only starting to emerge now, which is 10 years later, it's boutique services. And I think all financial advisory service, it should be in-house. That's one. The second one is philanthropy at school and teaching children about it. There was a really excellent paper by Alison Bodie called The Importance of Teaching Philanthropy, which is published in November 2020. And it basically talks about how engaging children in philanthropic action and charitable giving, like, it provides a really important opportunity for kids to critically participate and think about root causes, you know, and social issues and injustice and challenges being faced around the world. Because unless you teach them from young, you just carry on and their life is, and they're completely not in your headspace and nobody's ever talked to you about it. But if it becomes part of, you know, your curriculum, and it really should, from a really young age, so they understand the world around them.
I love it. It's close to my heart. You know that.
Yeah, I feel like a little fraud here, because I'm obviously part of the APPG in philanthropy and social investment. So this is a conversation they are having. What is the next role in philanthropy? And that is coming up. So obviously we work with the finance industry to try to upskill a workforce into doing what Juliet has suggested and creating their in-house service offer for their clients. You know, Juliet was there at the beginning of that. So the other is the civil society working with children at school. So very much they're taught that in American schools. The civil society, they have a whole class around it. Yeah, we don't have that here. And so, yeah, that's another area that they're focusing on. And the other is the idea of having someone in government who is focused on this as well. So those are the areas. And I think that is how do we encourage the conversation to be multi-dimensional, not just siloed.
I love it. I love it.
To help a slight challenge with that, though, in theory, I agree with having somebody in government, but then it's all going to be about elections, and so it's going to change. So if you have if Tories are in power and they have a philanthropy chief philanthropic, or whatever you're going to call them, and then you get a Labour one and you get a shadow philanthropic advisor, and it just becomes purely
then you've created new roles. Yeah. Think about that. It's a whole new.
That is the challenge. It's not a challenge that I go, oh, how dare you? It's an actual challenge. It is a challenge, and I think that I totally agree that these are challenges, but it doesn't mean it's not something that's necessary.
You guys are amazing.
Oh,
I really appreciate it. Thank you for talking about connecting and connectors and the Mushroom Network. What is it? My Corsial Network and puzzles and the things that you don't like and the things that you like. For everybody who's listening, Juliet and Zofia have different resources, and I'll post those in the podcast, and I'll also post links to them and their organizations so you all can get connected, because that's part of this podcast is connect women who are working in philanthropy with everybody else, each other. But just thank you so much for your time today, you guys. Thank you for everybody who's listening, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks, Michelle.